Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to episode 36 of the Fully Endorsed podcast. I am your host for today's episode, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and joining me, as always, is my good old co-host, Mr. Dylan McCandless, aka Super DM 64.
Should we briefly explain why the pseudo hiatus that we've undergone? I feel like, it's been probably a month since the last episode went up.
Well, partly it's due to multiple reasons. Some due to technical issues involving a broken AC adapter. I'm not going to name names. Maybe it could be the very person hosting this episode. I'm not sure.
Andres' laptop was down for a while. That's what he's dancing around.
Essentially, yeah. So I do apologize for those, especially for those interested in hearing our thoughts on the subject of today's episode. But we're back again. Fully Endorses back. Tell a friend.
So much has happened since we reported that last episode. The world is a different place, Andres.
Yes.
Movies have come out. History came to an end.
Yes. We're in the end game now, folks.
We're in the end game. Merge upon us.
Oh, imagine doing a whole fully endorsed on Chris Chan, or at least one of the many documentaries out there on him.
I do not fully endorse Chris Chan.
No one should.
If you're listening to this and you don't know what we're talking about, good. Don't look into it. Stop now and turn back.
If you go any further, you'll be lost in this rabbit hole, and there's no climbing out.
If you value your sanity, turn back now.
Otherwise, abandon all hope, you enter.
So yeah, but yeah, it's been a while.
Yes.
And, now here we are to talk about something really strange, or dare I say, bizarre.
Indeed. So, the subject of today's review, it is the 2012 animated adaptation of the first story arc of the widely beloved manga franchise JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which started in January 1st, 1987. The first story arc, titled Phantom Blood, lasted a good roughly 8 months, from early January all the way to late October of 1987. It was the story arc that kickstarted the long-running manga series, and that is still continuing to this very day. In fact, as of now...
It's crazy that they waited so long to give it an anime adaptation. I mean, other than that movie that failed.
Well, this is not... Well, before the movie, this is not the first time JoJo has been adapted to anime. In fact, Part 3, the third story arc, Stardust Crusaders, which is arguably the most well-known and most iconic story arc in JoJo, that got an anime.
That's probably the one that I've heard the most about out of context without knowing anything about the franchise prior.
Right. If at any point in time, like, the interesting thing about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's one of those franchises that even if you've never watched it, more than likely, if you've been on the internet long enough, you have at least heard of it or have seen some references to it.
Right. It's also the kind of show that I compared it to this with you when we were watching it. It's sort of like an anime equivalent to Doctor Who in a weird way.
Yeah.
In that you don't need to watch all of it because each sort of era is so radically different. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great, and then sometimes the people that you hate are leaving the show finally, and I'm so happy. But
and the main protagonist technically changes for every story, major arc, or every major era.
Yeah, some very exciting Doctor Who news that also happened while we were away.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. It's a show that's constantly reinventing itself. So you're saying the third story arc got adapted previously?
Yes. So the third story arc, Stardust Crusaders, was adapted into an anime series, into an OVA series. But here's the interesting thing. So Stardust Crusaders was adapted all the way back in 1993, but they didn't adapt the whole story. They only adapted the second half of the story. Because they were only given a budget for, I believe, 6 episodes, I think, maybe more or less. And so they said, well, if we only got enough budget for 6 episodes, let's do the second half so we can, it's essentially imagine like this was Dragon Ball, per se, and they were going to adapt.
Predicament. That's an interesting predicament to be in. It's like we only have enough money to adapt half of this story.
Yes.
So do we want a story with a beginning but no ending, or a story with an ending but no beginning?
Right. So like because Dragon Ball is a franchise, I'm sure more of our audience is familiar with. Imagine you got money to adapt you only got enough money for like 6 or so episodes, and you decide, well, let's do the Frieza saga because that's the arc that most people are familiar with, but let's skip all the way ahead to the Goku versus Frieza stuff, and let's just adapt that. And then, here's a weird thing. Sorry?
That would be very strange.
Yeah, it is. And but then here's the kicker. So they adapted Part 3 into an OVA series from 1993 to 1994, and then 6 years later, from 2000 to 2002, they made another 6 or so episodes telling the first half of the story.
Oh, they George Lucas did, huh?
Yes.
Crazy.
But here's the thing, like, the 90s episodes were all traditionally animated, and then the 2000s episodes were all done digitally, so the animation styles, like, really don't match. It's like night and day. It's like having, like, imagine the Frieza saga was like 90s quality DBZ animation, and then the first half of this Frieza saga was like Dragon Ball Super quality animation.
Well, that just sounds awful, Andres.
Yeah, so Stardust Crusaders was the very first time JoJo had ever been adapted to anime, and then cut to 2007, where Phantom Blood, the story arc that we are going to be covering for this episode, it was adapted into a feature film, with many portions of the story cut out due to time, because this was only a 100-minute film, and you can only tell so much of a story in such a short amount of time. Such is the case with the Stardust Crusaders OVA from the 90s and 2000s as well. That also had to truncate a lot of its story to fit like those like 12 or so episodes total. And so,
yeah, especially because this is one of those stories that we can get into this, but I feel like at certain points it becomes needlessly complicated, if you understand what I'm saying. Like there are times, like overall this is a relatively simple story,
yeah,
then there are all these like little twists and turns that happen occasionally where it's like this just got really complicated for a second. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, for sure. Yeah,
it's like story. Here's the point. Here's the story point. Dio is poisoning Jojo's dad. Okay, great. That's the story point. But then it turns into this whole detour of like, well, I must go to London and I must find this Chinese guy that he bought this poison from, and while I'm there, I will be attacked by a street gang. It's like all this crazy shit that happens. that yeah, if you're gonna adapt this into a movie, you gotta trim all that back.
Yeah, and apparently the creator of JoJo, Hirohiko Araki, was not happy with the final result at all, and has refused to allow this movie to be released after its initial theatrical run. So it is considered a piece of lost media that remains to be unseen to this very day. However, several years ago, I'm not exactly sure how long ago, but at an Japanese animation school, one of the professors was friends with knew somebody who was involved in the studio that animated that Phantom Blood movie. So he got roughly 15-16 minutes of animation from that movie, with sound effects and music, but no dialogue, and gave this footage to his students to work on as an editing project to presumably put their own audio, edit their own audio on top of the animation. And so one of the students eventually leaked this 16 minutes of footage to the internet for the world to see. And you and I showed you this animation, showed it to you so that we would have something to compare it to. So this is pretty much all we know of that exists publicly of the...
It was interesting. It was interesting because it was animated very well. Like, it looked great.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautifully done.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it didn't look like JoJo. It was,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't as stylized. The characters had a more sort of generic anime look to them.
Mm-hmm.
I kept joking that Dio looked like Joey Wheeler, because he did in that movie. He just looked like fucking Joey Wheeler, and I was like, I could have swore him and Tristan used to get along better than this. But it doesn't have quite the sort of the style of the way that they look in this show, which from what I've seen is directly taken from the manga. This is the way it looked.
Right. You take one look at JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and you can tell this was definitely a product of its time. This was a manga that came out in the wake of something like a Fist of the North Star, which this manga borrowed a lot of heavy inspiration from. It was essentially like 80s action movies crossed with Bram Stoker's Dracula, mixed with a bit of that signature Araki flamboyant flair. And
and I wonder, one of the things that really struck me is the way he draws like faces. Like he puts a lot of detail into people's faces, like the little lines on the nose and just everything is very spelled out for you in a way that modern anime don't typically do. They lean towards a more simpler style, and I wonder if that was just a more of a thing in the 80s for manga in general. I don't know. I mean, a similar thing happened in America, in American animation. You look at like the way Hanna-Barbera drew people back in like, the 60s with like your Space Ghosts or like your Johnny Quests, and everybody's very like anatomically correct, like they just look like animated versions of real people walking around, and then you skip forward to now, and our cartoons are just like little colorful blobs with googly eyes on them. Like it's
very true.
It's a very different thing. So
Right.
I wonder if that's I wonder if that's of its time, if that's an 80s thing, or if that's just his style specifically.
I want to say it's the answer is a combination of both, because you're right. This was definitely the style that was popular at the time. People loved, very buff, muscular, super machismo, hyper masculine characters, and he was clearly into that as well at the time. And so it's also very possible that he also wanted to have fun with it and wanted to portray masculinity and femininity in ways that were normally never really experimented with or portrayed in a way that helped his manga stand apart from the crowd, and what helped that his series continue to this very day. And
he also really likes that dark shadow.
Big time, yeah.
Like the shadows on people's faces. And normally a shadow is just like it's slightly darker than the rest of their skin, in a cartoon. I've recently been experimenting a lot with drawing shadows on characters, and basically you just draw it like a black outline, and then or a black shape, and then I turn the opacity down halfway, so it just creates like this sort of gray effect. But the opacity on these shadows is not turned down at all. This is the shadows in this show are like black.
This is like Mike
black.
This is like Mike Mignola style levels of shading.
Yeah, or if anybody's familiar with the animation style of those Mortal Kombat animated movies that they're doing right now at Warner Brothers. They also do that, just like strict black shadows, and it's interesting. It's very harsh, but it also creates like a lot of contrast. Absolutely.
And the other thing I also want to bring up was that what I really find refreshing going back and looking at this older style of animation is just, I feel like a lot of current anime art trends tend to go for more of that cute, quote unquote cute or kawaii art style. They want something that looks very appealing in that sort of sweet, innocent sort of way. And just for me personally, go ahead.
Children especially, because even though Japan is sort of a lot freer about like anime, they don't have that thing that we have here where it's like animation is for kids. They make animation for all kinds of demographics. I think it's still their largest demographic. Definitely is like children coming home from school and watching anime for 30 minutes before they spend all night doing homework.
Right. Or going to cram schools or learning centers and whatnot.
or scrubbing their floor or whatever they do. Just work until they die. And for half an hour that day, they watch some anime, whether it's, you know, a Pokemon or a Yokai Watch or whatever, and it's all just like cute, colorful characters.
Yeah, that is true. So like, for me, it's actually very refreshing to go back to this, to like, whenever I watch JoJo, it's always refreshing to revisit this era of this more detailed, I would say honestly, a very beautiful art style. Not so much on cuteness, but just focusing more on like this sort of stylized take on slightly more realistic characters, and especially like looking at the women in particular. It's kind of refreshing to see women drawn not as, this will sound strange, but it's like, it was kind of refreshing to see female characters who are not drawn to be cute, but are rather drawn to be beautiful, if that makes any sense.
They're also not overtly sexualized as they would be in a modern anime.
Yeah, well, trust me, if anyone's being sexualized, it's definitely the men in this show.
Yes, right. No women in this show. None of them have tickle bitties.
No.
Nobody has the gigantic fucking milkers that you see in modern anime. It's all very sort of flat and sort of subdued, and you know,
elegant, you would say.
Reined in.
I would say, like, to shout out to my buddy Will, aka Crooked Lore. He has this like recurring joke where he always refers to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as a show that does not have fan service, rather it has plenty of man service.
Oh.
Again, that I feel like that is like Araki's very interesting take on portraying masculinity. I'm not sure if he's just making fun of masculinity or if he just says like, you know, this is just really cool for me to draw. Who knows?
If he realizes how homoerotic it is, you know, like
I want to say, I don't know.
Is this a Joel Schumacher situation? Like, is he doing it on purpose, or is it just happening? You know?
I mean, as far as
half the time, I don't know if Dio and JoJo are gonna kill each other or fuck, you know.
Well,
and it's like,
well, here's the thing: when it comes to Dio, fans,
or both.
Funny enough, when it comes to Dio, so in the show, and you know, the manga, the story, whatever, Dio has the main villain of this series. We should get to describing what happens in this show, but before that, Dio is a villain who manages to persuade various individuals to come to the dark side, as you could say. And this would continue on in any future appearances of the characters. Spoiler alert. See, he has a
wow, Andres, wow.
he has a way of manipulating people and sort of bringing them closer with the promise of power and all that sort of fortune and, you know, power beyond their wildest dreams. Some people have come to interpret this as, oh, Dio has the ability to seduce these people, men and women alike. Much like, because he is essentially a Dracula type villain, and Dracula and vampires are known for being very sexual creatures.
Yes, that's very true. That is very true. That's a common theme in vampire stories going back to, well, specifically, I think Dracula, the Bram Stoker novel, kind of introduced that, because prior to that, vampires were just like, you know, folk legends about, you know, monsters that come at night and drink your blood and eat your babies or whatever. And now it's and then Bram Stoker injected this sort of this
sexual element.
Yeah, this theme about like sexual repression in Victorian era England, and this creature that threatens that, this exotic foreigner who's coming in to sleep with your women.
Right. Go ahead.
No, that was it. That's all I was saying.
And the last thing I want to bring up when it comes to Araki's art is that his own art has gone through a very interesting evolution, where his character designs become less hyper masculine and definitely more feminine in that sort of like supermodel, slimmed down supermodel levels of proportions. And I just shared with you a link on the on StreamYard right now, so you can see this sort of progression from part 1 all the way to the current story arc part 8. You can tell around part 4 is when he starts to slim down his characters.
Right. Yeah. I see this. Yeah, it's definitely very macho early on, and then it goes from He-Man to She-Ra really quickly, or somewhere right in the middle here.
And yeah, that's pretty much like So even with him having such a, I would say this is sort of Araki sort of developing his own art style over time, whereas before he was sort of picking up off of what was popular during the 80s, and since then he decided to sort of shift his art direction and go off in his own unique brand of artistic sensibilities, I'd say. And so I would say the early stuff is definitely what people tend to think of when they think JoJo. Even though I would say if you look down at like from part 5 all the way to part 8, that has definitely been his current art style for at least the last 20 years.
Right. It's still recognizably him, but it's just toned down, I suppose.
Oh yeah. It's also really surreal as a JoJo fan whenever he goes back and draws his older characters in his current art style. So now everyone has.
That would be weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find an image right now.
It's like the comic adaptation of Mad Love, where everybody's drawn like the new Batman Adventures. Even that, or no, I have that backwards. Everyone's drawn like TAS, but then the episode is in the new Batman Adventures. So it's like the comic. It's like it's the same story, but everybody looks different.
Okay, so here's the artwork featuring all of the protagonists from the various parts of JoJo in his modern art style, with the shirtless dude being Jonathan Joestar.
That's Jonathan Joestar?
Yeah, in his current style.
No.
No. Also, when Go ahead.
Where's the part 2 guy? I don't see the part 2 guy.
He's the guy in the hat. He depicts him in his older form as he appears in part 3.
Oh, the wide-brimmed blue hat? That's him?
Yes.
I see. That's not Jonathan Joseph. Get the fuck out of here.
Let me show you another depiction of Jonathan Joestar. So there's a part in... Eventually, when JoJo was collected into a series of these big, massive volumes, Araki did portraits of each individual character, again, in his current art style, for the cover of each of these, like, super volumes. And there's the artwork for Volume 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the English version. And here is his art for Dio for Volume 2.
No. Look at. Why does he have such big lips?
That is the thing that is definitely the sort of style he goes for. And he has gotten a fair bit of criticism these days for kind of drawing the same face on everyone these days.
Yeah, look at Joseph and then look at Dio. You swap the hair, it's the same fucking person.
That is certainly true.
And it's a bummer because, they had very distinct looks in the original. This is even worse than when Dio just turned into Joey Wheeler. Like, this is...
and
the same face.
And finally, here is the third and final volume of Part 1, where he features Zeppeli.
Yeah, he doesn't exaggerate his features as much.
Mm-hmm. And I would say another interesting aspect of Araki's art is that when it comes to the use of color... according to Araki, there are no quote-unquote canon colors in his story. He just tends to go with whatever colors suit the mood of that particular piece he's working on. And so when it came to the 2012 anime adaptation, they went in a very interesting direction where there is a standard color palette that is used for I'd say 90% of the anime, but during intense action sequences, the entirety of the animation takes on a brand new, wildly different, brightly colored color palette, where like everything would be different shades of orange or different shades of green or blue or purple. And I think that also helps to sort of give the anime itself a very distinguishing look even like years later. And I think it's a really nice means of reflecting the sort of fluid approach Araki always had to color.
Right. That's interesting.
And let's see. Another thing that's also very distinct for JoJo, maybe not so distinct, but it has become a thing that has become a part of JoJo's visual identity, are the use of katakanas, where I guess they are the equivalent, like these katakana symbols, they are essentially letters that are there to portray onomatopoeia. So if you've ever read a comic before, I'm sure you've seen stuff like bam, boom, crash, bam, boom, bang, pow, wham.
Right. Yeah.
And when it comes to manga, they have their own set of usual common usual onomatopoeias, and they usually use katakana to portray said onomatopoeia words. But a lot of them are not real words, in the same case that a lot of comic book artists and writers, myself included, would just simply make up new sounds. So maybe for electricity sound, you would hear bzzz, or if something is like breaking, you see a bunch of like crackle, 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 or whatever. So when it comes to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, they tend to use two distinct. They use a lot of katakana symbols on screen, giving it the appearance of like a living, breathing manga. But the two that fans are most familiar with are do 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 or go 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 go. And usually those are onomatopoeias to accent an intimidating aura that a character were to have. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan, but we don't really have the equivalent of that, in the English equivalent of that in our own onomatopoeia, right? We don't really have anything that says intimidating.
No, I mean, no, we tend to do that with music rather than with sound effect.
Right.
You want to give a character a terrifying aura.
Mm-hmm.
You do it with some sort of like creepy music or suspenseful music. You wouldn't do it through the use of onomatopoeia.
Right. But in Japan, they apparently do it all the time.
Interestingly enough, I think of Aku's theme from Samurai Jack, which kind of sounds like what you were just describing from JoJo. Like it's just like this like
rumbling sound.
It's just repeating like no noise. Like it's interesting.
Yeah.
I doubt it was meant as a reference, but it's
a JoJo reference, Dylan.
Yes.
That's a interesting thing about the JoJo fandom is that they and myself included love just shoving JoJo references into anything and everything, especially
y'all really are just the Rick and Morty fandom of anime. And,
yeah,
and I know that probably hurts to hear, but it's true.
To be fair, you must have an IQ intelligence to understand and enjoy JoJo. No, I'm not going to go there.
To be fair.
So that is a thing that, like, ever since for the longest time, JoJo was always sort of like a very popular franchise, but only in Japan, as far as I know. It could be popular in other countries.
Yeah,
but
that's the thing. That's the interesting thing about this show, is that, it's been around since the 80s, apparently, this franchise. Yes. But in America, I feel like it just sort of appeared, like, 3 years ago tops. Like, it feels like it just popped out of nowhere and is suddenly like this huge thing that a lot of people know about. And I guess it must be how a lot of people felt when, and again, I'm going to compare JoJo to this. I guess it's how a lot of American people must have felt when Doctor Who got really big here for a minute.
Yeah.
During the Matt Smith era, because for a long time, Doctor Who was very niche in America. Those of us who knew about it, and the general public just didn't. And then all of a sudden, it just exploded one day. And so I was on the inside of that explosion. I was already a Doctor Who fan before the explosion, so I got to witness like the public become aware of this thing that I already knew about. And I feel like with the JoJo explosion, I had the opposite experience. I was on the outside of it. I didn't know anything about it. And I was just like, what is this fucking thing that I keep seeing everywhere?
Right. Definitely. I would say, honestly, for me personally, my first exposure to JoJo was actually Jump Ultimate Stars, which was the second of two fighting games on the Nintendo DS that featured a plethora of characters from Shonen Jump magazine. Everyone from Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, and yes, even JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which featured two characters from Part 3. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why these two individuals were fighting each other indirectly through their punching ghosts. But I said, oh, that's a rather interesting name for a manga. I didn't know what to make of it, but eventually I started seeing that name pop up slowly over time. And yeah, it was pretty much this 2012 anime that you and I are reviewing. That was the thing that brought JoJo to the States. Technically, there have been like the original 90s/2000s OVA did make it to America on both, I think, either VHS, certainly DVD, but I think maybe VHS as well. And for a while, yeah, JoJo was this super niche thing in America, but the 2012 series definitely was the thing that brought JoJo properly to America, at which point people saw it and were either confused by it, or they loved it, or both, in most cases. And over time,
you had to be like a 12th level weeb to have heard of this at one point. And now, I feel like if you get into anime, this is going to be one of the first things that you hear about, because it's just referenced all over the internet. It's just everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely, I would say it's perhaps the obnoxiousness of JoJo fans and their insistence of inserting JoJo references anywhere and everywhere that caused people to have at least heard of the series. Which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it means more people at least heard about it. A curse because now people are associating it with a bunch of nonsense.
Let's be fair, Andres. Every shonen fandom is kind of obnoxious, though.
You're right. I mean,
y'all take it to another level. Don't get me wrong, but like, the fucking Naruto people who are just all about Naruto, or the One Piece people, or the Dragon Ball people, like me.
Mm-hmm.
We all have that.
That's true. Everyone is guilty. Everyone is guilty. Certainly guilty of something. And for me personally, it wasn't until 2016.
Oh, My Hero Academia is the other big one. That's the most recent one, I think. The My Hero Academia, is it Demia or Demia?
Academia.
Academia. That fan base is like the most recent one that I'm like, shut up.
Are you sure? Because now Demon Slayer is the big thing that people are super hyped about.
Listen, I don't keep up with these things, Andres.
It's like I'm like My Hero Academia. That's like 5 years old, Dylan. You gotta get up. We gotta be in it with. You gotta hip with the kids.
Listen, I like anime and all, but I'm very casual about it. I'm not a weeb at all. At least in that way. So it's like 5 years old is not that old to me,
That is true. Yeah. So I guess going into JoJo Part One, the one that started it all. A lot of people would say that some people would say that Part One is not exactly the best introduction for a newcomer such as yourself to get into JoJo, simply because it's far from the best one. For many people see it as like the least good one. And I would chalk that up to just simply this is Araki was not as experienced of a mangaka at this point. He had only written, I believe, like 2 or 3 published series that have all perhaps been canceled in under a year. And so when it came to this one, he was still sort of working out his skills as an artist, as a writer, and he was one of those individuals that would certainly improve as he went along, and the manga was certainly displayed that. So it's kind of like, it's a lot like DBZ Abridged, You go back to those like older episodes of DBZA, and you know that the writing is not quite as sharp, or their editing was not as on point compared to their work in the Frieza and especially the Cell Saga. But you always gotta appreciate their humble beginnings. Like I've said this to so many people who want to get into comics, who want to get into writing. You gotta start from somewhere. And
right.
As a JoJo fan, I still think that there is enough here to appreciate, especially given how short, sweet, and simple this story is. It's a simple story of two step-brothers who go down very different paths, one good, one evil, and eventually they sort of meet together in a sort of unstoppable force meets an immovable object in a clash of classic good versus evil melodrama.
Right, and it starts out not feeling much like an anime at all, or like a manga, or like a Japanese property at all, because it's set in England, and it's very sort of Dickensian. It's all like rich families and like these big drafty houses and like
pip pip cheerio, teen crumpet and whatnot.
Cheerio, we've got to go to the rugby game, yes, and all that shit, and it's like very sort of like. Sort of straight-laced and straightforward, and then you introduce the supernatural elements, and we start dipping into like the Dracula stuff, which obviously gets me hooked more, because I'm that's sort of more my forte. And then midway through, it goes full anime.
Yes.
And as soon as Led Zeppelin shows up and starts teaching him the ways of the Force, it goes very anime very quickly.
Oh, big time, yes.
Once you introduce the magic system, it's time to start power scaling. You ain't got time to set the tone anymore. You gotta get into that. You gotta get into that shonen goodness. That is certainly the case there. That's when it came to JoJo Part One. It is pretty much Araki's take on Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a lot of action, a lot of horror. It mixes a lot of different genres over time. It's a lot of stuff that he was really into at the time, and sort of put it into one big melting pot that became JoJo Part 1. And I definitely respect Araki for going out of his... I don't know if you would say it is his comfort zone or out of his comfort zone, but I do gotta respect him for being ambitious enough to want to make a story involving a culture that's far from like your typical Japanese stuff. Like, I've noticed a good chunk of... I could be wrong, but from what I've personally seen, I've noticed that a lot of Japanese creators tend to focus on stories that take place in Japan or revel in Japanese or even like Asian culture or the wider Asian culture. Or it'll be set in a fantasy world, but it's very Japanese. It's a very Japanese fantasy world,
Yeah. Whether it's like Naruto or Bleach or stuff like that, or
I mean, the world of Dragon Ball is super Chinese, aside from all of the fucking high tech, futuristic
and Terminator stuff elements.
It's like classical China meets fucking Star Wars. Like it's an interesting world that he's built. Not even Star Wars, more the Jetsons, really. It's sort of that classic sort of futurism.
And I would say like someone like I think his name was Oda. Oda is the creator of One Piece, and One Piece has its own very unique pirate pirate culture. It's everything of this world. The One Piece world is entirely fictional and very well structured and fully mapped out. So that is certainly something where it's like...
It's still fucking going 20 goddamn years later, or however long it's been running. One Piece, is it the longest running shit, like, in the history?
I will check right now. I know JoJo has to be up there. Okay, so I looked it up, and it appears that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the 9th longest running manga series, with One Piece being number 25. And the number 1 all-time longest series is Golgo 13. I haven't read Golgo 13, but I'm somewhat familiar with it, only because I had a friend of mine who was a big fan of the series, and I believe it revolves around an assassin.
I have also never read Golgo 13, nor am I likely to, because it's just too long. There's just so much of it. Right.
But going into... So, I talked a lot about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and... I mentioned that it is a rather simple story. It starts out very simple before it gets more and more complex. So overall, what has been like your experience watching this series, knowing that it had this like large legacy behind it?
Well, obviously I knew about the legacy going on. I try not to let that, color my expectations or my judgment while watching it. I don't. But yeah, I definitely saw, or I got to figure out rather, what the fuss was about, because that's really what I was going into this trying to figure out. It's like, all right, let's see what the fuss is all about. Let's see
what's so bizarre about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
What's so bizarre about what are these fucking people talking about?
What's the deal with JoJo?
Right. I felt like a normie at a Star Trek convention. Like I'm just like, all right, let's figure this shit out. Let's.
Yeah.
And I think I definitely got an idea for why this is such a popular and beloved and long-running franchise. It's very. I also understand why it's so heavily memed. It's very memeable.
Mm-hmm.
It almost is a meme in a way.
I do remember that within the first episode alone, you commented on just how over the top everyone was, and how we were watching the English dub for it, and like how the English dub actors were hamming it up as much as humanly possible.
Yes, and that's maybe the biggest part that I found the most enjoyable, frankly, is like everything is so dramatic. When Dio gets out of that carriage,
yes,
at the mansion, he leaps forth from it like a gazelle or something, and then he lands, and then they start having their conversations, and everyone is just like acting, and it's like
even the way he stares is over the top, where you get another Japanese onomatopoeia, ban.
Everyone is just dialed up to fucking 12, not even 11. They're just on all the time.
I think I may have, either you or I may have mentioned where it's like, this isn't just ham, this is the entire Thanksgiving dinner.
I was like, it's the whole damn pig.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes, it was the whole damn pig.
Yeah,
yes.
They really went all out.
Absolutely. And it never lets up. Like right from the get-go, it starts off with the with a carriage accident leading to the death of JoJo's mother, and you have the father who's who is near death, and you have Dario Brando, who is Dio's eventual father, and both the fathers meet, thus intertwining the lives of their sons. Dio, in the first once Dario Brando dies, Jonathan, the main protagonist's father, agrees to take Dio in as his own son, and from there, Dio decides to make Jonathan's life a living hell, resulting in this clash by the end of the episode where Jonathan says, "Enough is enough! I've had it with this motherfucker trying to make my life hell. This fucker killed my dog."
Off screen. We found out what happened. We found out what happened in the anime.
Right. Manga. In the manga, you see the poor dog burn to a crisp. But he killed my dog. He humiliated my girlfriend. He turned all my friends against me. Fuck this guy. And then
he has better hair.
He has better hair. Yes. He's stronger than me. He's smarter than me. He's prettier than me. Fuck this guy. And after he kicks his ass, finally, cut to however many years later, where these two teens are now in college. Both of them got swole as fuck during that time. And eventually, Dio shows his true colors finally, where he attempts to poison his stepfather, much like he did with his own father. And during this whole time, there's this ancient Aztec mask in the background, which was owned as a relic by his family, because British people, rich folks do be like that. They always like to own a bunch of crazy foreign objects as prized collectibles.
You walk into their house and they insist on telling you all about it, even though you didn't ask. Like, oh yes, this is an African fertility idol, and you're like, I don't give a shit.
Right.
Where's the booze?
It's kind of like me and my equivalent. It's like, oh yes, this is a Transformers War for Cybertron Earthrise Starscream. It was quite the collector. I had to pay quite a pretty penny for this figure.
Yes. Next in the collection. It's like, Jesus.
No, here is the BotCon exclusive variant of the exact same figure that I paid 3 times as much for.
By the way, have I told you about my comic? And you're like, Jesus fucking Christ.
So, it turns out...
It's the physical object equivalent of, like, people who insist on showing you, like, slides of their vacation.
Yes! So, it turns out this mask is an ancient Aztec relic that can turn people into vampires. And so, out of desperation...
Because apparently the Aztecs were into that sort of thing.
Who knew?
in both this and in From Dusk Till Dawn, there's for some reason.
So out of desperation, once Dio has been caught red-handed, he puts on the mask, becomes a vampire, and at which point he decides he's going to take over the world with his newfound power. And at that
you do.
Yeah, so this was something that a YouTuber by the name of Totally Not Mark pointed out during his retrospective of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He mentioned that the first couple chapters of this story arc focused primarily on Dio and his rise to power, at which point we then shift focus to Jonathan, and he essentially goes through the hero's journey as he works his way up to Dio's level.
Right. It's a lot like, superhero movies do this a lot. In the first half of the movie, you introduce your hero, but you also have to, very quickly go through the villain's origin as well, so that you can have them established in the second half of the movie, Mm-hmm. So it's like you watch Spider-Man, and they're introducing Peter Parker, and he's getting bit by the spider and all that, but at the same time, you have this whole other story going on with Willem Dafoe, and he's getting sacked from his company, and do you know how much I sacrificed? And then he goes in the thing, and he gets the gas, and it's like a whole mini-movie inside the first half of the movie, just so that you can have him there as an antagonistic force in the second half of the movie. Same thing with, the Joker in Batman 89.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what they do here. The first couple episodes, it's Jonathan's there. We learn a lot about Jonathan. He's going to London with his little deerskin cap and everything, but we spend a lot of time just establishing Dio, because we have to introduce this character,
mm-hmm.
give him motivations, and then turn him into a fucking vampire.
Yes.
It's a lot.
And I will say, I feel like in many cases, Dio I feel like he outshines Jonathan. Not to discredit Jonathan at all, I think he makes for a compelling protagonist. You could say he is a very basic protagonist, but I think it works for this type of story, for such a simple story. But
I also think the voice acting has something to do with this. And again, we're going off the English dub. I don't know what the original Japanese voices are like at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the guy who plays Dio is really good.
Remarkable, yes.
And the guy who plays Jojo is fine.
Yes.
He is also good.
Yes. Well, it also helps that he's Johnny Young Bosch. He's Vash the Stampede. He's Ichigo Kurosaki. He's Zero from the recent Mega Man games. He's
a frog.
He's a frog. He's Adam from Power Rangers. There's probably way more characters I'm forgetting at the moment, but he's a very talented voice actor, and I'm honestly really happy they got him on board to play the original JoJo.
Right. Yes. Exactly. And it's partly just the fact that other voice actor is bringing it so hard, but it's also
mm-hmm.
just the writing also, because Johnny Young Bosch can be super energetic. You go watch Trigun,
mm-hmm.
And he's very entertaining as Vash the Stampede. He has a very huge personality in that, so he can do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely.
But,
yes.
But that's just not how the character is written here. So I think all of those factors come together to just make Dio. He just sticks out more in the memory.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mentioned earlier, spoiler, that Dio was so popular that Araki eventually brought him back for part 3. And so where he got to shine even more so with even more iconic moments.
Also, the vampire lore in this universe is really fucking weird.
Yeah, it is. It's like a cross between vampires and zombies, where the mask can create vampires, and vampires in turn create zombies, which are like vampires, but they're not as strong.
Yeah, vampires are way more powerful in this universe than they are in pretty much any other form of media I've ever seen. Because, normally it's like, all right, if vampires were real, it's like we know what to do, right? You sign of the cross and you do the stake through the heart and you do garlic bread. But
none of that religious shit.
These guys, they can freeze you by touching you, and they don't even have to bite you to drain your blood. They fucking sucks people's blood through his fingertips.
Like they're John Carpenter's The Thing.
And then at the end of the movie, he just starts fucking shooting laser beams out of his eyes. I'm like, he's Superman now.
Yep. And then also some more mild spoilers. In part 2, you realize where the vampires came from, and the vampires originally originated from a subgroup of species of humans that are kind of vampires, but they're like well beyond vampires. In fact, vampires are just a lesser human version of this branch of humanity here.
And it's like, wow, the power scaling in the show just got really crazy really fast.
Yeah. It's also got, to talk more about like sort of the legacy of JoJo. It's very interesting how he kind of, Araki sets up this whole idea between vampires and Hamon users. Hamon being the name for this universe's equivalent to spiritual energy, whether it's
the magic system.
The magic system, yeah. It's the Force from Star Wars. It's Ki from Dragon Ball.
Or Chi from Mulan.
From Mulan. Yeah.
It's the morphing grid, it's the power cosmic, it's, whatever.
Right. And it's crazy to think that after two story arcs focusing on this sort of power scale system, that Araki decided eventually to throw it all out the window in favor of a brand new system, which turned out to be stands. And stands, that's a whole... It's kind of like imagine Dragon Ball kind of abandoning Ki, and they start using, I don't know, mech power armor.
From what you've described to me, it sounds a bit like Zatch Bell, or like
yeah,
or like
Shaman King,
or Blue Dragon,
or better yet, are you familiar with the video game series Persona? Because Persona took heavy inspiration from JoJo Part 3.
I am familiar with Persona in name only. I know nothing about it.
Okay, essentially what Part 3 onwards it brought to the table was, inside select few individuals is a literal fighting spirit that is the representation of your will to fight and kick ass. And everyone's got these select individuals can manifest a ghostly figure that for the most part stands next to you, hence the term stand. And these things have wide range of abilities that go far beyond anything that Hamon can do. And I feel like it was kind of like Araki's way of doing what Stan Lee did initially with the X-Men, where Stan Lee wanted to have a whole team of characters with all these crazy powers, and it's like, how do you explain the origins of all these powers? He's like, well, they're mutants. They were born with it. And
right, it's sort of like a monster fight anime, except you only get one monster and that's it. And you're born with it. You don't get to pick it, and it's just there.
True. Yep. But going back to Phantom Blood, with the use of the vampires and the stands, I thought it was really well fleshed out, and I think the use of the Hamon system, or Ripple as it's translated and used. I'm not sure, I know the anime dub goes with Hamon. I'm not sure if it's because it matches with the mouth flaps or whatever, but in other translations it is translated as Ripple. But I'm just going to go with Hamon because that's the one that you and I have been exposed to thanks to the dub. When it came to the Hamon system, I thought it was a very interesting means of allowing humans to go toe-to-toe with these crazy powerful vampire characters. Essentially what Hamon is it's the ability to to manifest heat within your blood, to manipulate the heat within your blood to match the power equivalent to the sun, which is still in this universe is the vampire's primary weakness. So being able to utilize the power of the sun in your hands through the flow of your blood, and in order to control the flow of your blood requires concentrated breathing. If you can't breathe, you can't use Hamon, and that is used effectively by the villains against the heroes in multiple instances. And so it's sort of become...
That's really the best part about this whole magic system,
mm-hmm.
is the way it's explained.
Yes, I would say so.
Bending from Avatar, there's another example of magic system.
Yes.
The explanation for how it works is very in-depth, and it makes sense, and it has a logical consistency to it, and that's really good, because a lot of times a magic system is just there, and there's no sort of explanation of how it works. It's just like, you can do it, heart of the cards, Yugi, but it's like, this is, there's like a technique to it, and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of in-depth explanation, sometimes mid-fight, where REO Speedwagon, yes, you heard me correctly, will be standing over on the sidelines just going, my God, he just used the such and such technique to neutralize his so-and-so technique, and then he turned around and did, like, he's constantly narrating the whole fight and explaining everything to you as it's happening. It's honestly kind of exhausting. And
that is one of my few gripes with JoJo Part 1, is that, Speedwagon, the character of Speedwagon, who starts off as a villain but quickly becomes JoJo's best mate, is nothing more than he's more than just a cheerleader. He's literally the narrator explaining the entire fight moment by moment to the audience.
Yeah, and other shonen anime do this too. Krillin will be on the sidelines and he'll say, "Oh my God, Goku did the da da da," or
"Hey, I can't believe Yugi is using that card against Seto Kaiba."
Oh, Yugi, he used the swords of revealing light to counteract Seto Kaiba's, his fucking blue eyes. Bada bing. And it's like...
You're a Meshi!
You're a Meshi. He's using the spirit gun to shoot that demon in the fucking balls. But it's like, but those other anime, they only do it at, like, key moments. Like... I feel like they save it for when something needs to be explained.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did he do that? And then Piccolo will go, "Oh, you see, he da-da-da with the fucking spirit bomb," or whatever. Whereas in this, it's everything. He narrates the entire fight. Sometimes things that you're like, yes, I know REO Speedwagon, I just saw it.
Right.
So you can take your narration and just take it on the run, baby.
I wonder if this was just... a fact that, I feel like it was during the 80s where the battle manga formula started to really become popular, especially when you had shows like Dragon Ball with its various tournament arcs, and stuff like that. I wonder if it's
fighting.
Go ahead.
It's not just fighting either. It's also like characters will constantly monologue about their motivations.
Yes.
It's constantly like, I am Dio, and I will kill Jojo because I hate Jojo because of this and this, and now I am a vampire, and I will drain his blood, and I will turn them into zombies, and I will take over the world, and da 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 da. And they're just constantly monologuing about everything, and I think that is sort of an old school anime sort of thing. It reminds me a lot of Speed Racer, like, we need to win the race so that we can get the money with the monkey, and it's like, slow down.
Speed, you cannot race this race. It's a very dangerous race. Ee, ooh, ah.
Oh, but I must race this race. Aww. It's like...
I do think it's kind of it's a reflection of the time from which it was created in. And I would say, like, while the whole idea of explaining a character's moves, either while they're doing it or after they're doing it, it is prevalent throughout the series. Because a lot of this stuff, I would say Araki has this idea of sort of mapping out and strategizing his fights, where characters would pull off one move and they would have to find a means of working around said move in order to counterattack that, and the other opponent has to counterattack his opponent's counterattack.
Right.
And the fights get more and more complex as the manga goes on from beyond part 1. Especially when stands are brought into the mix, and at which point, like, anything can happen at that point. But I would say he definitely gets better at that. And it's very fun as someone who has watched ahead, has kept up to JoJo all the way up to part 5, only because I've been following the anime, not the manga. It's very interesting to see the beginnings of how Araki deals with fights, and how characters must develop strategies on the spot in order to overcome their villains' strengths and utilizing their weaknesses.
Right, yeah. That's the interesting thing about long-running sort of shonen manga is that there's always an evolution. You watch early Dragon Ball and you wouldn't even imagine some of the crazy shit that happens later on.
Right,
Or like,
right.
or like, you show somebody Yu Yu Hakusho for the first time, and like, there's like a several episode story arc early on where it's just Yusuke babysitting an egg, and you're
Yes.
like, you have no idea where this is going. Like, the Dark Tournament arc is coming. You have no idea, man.
Right. And this, we're not even getting into stuff like Hiei and Kurama.
Right. You watch early Naruto, and it's like, oh yeah, he's shadow cloning himself, and he turns them all into sexy ladies. Like, man, you don't know what's gonna happen later.
Right. There's, Naruto's eventually going to become a fucking nine-tailed kaiju, and then Sasuke's going to turn into a giant fucking purple samurai Daimajin dude.
You haven't even met Gaara yet.
Yes. So there's definitely a lot of fun to see where it all started and seeing how kind of simple, even like, funny enough, it's funny calling it simple. Like, I feel like that is the beauty of Phantom Blood. It's both simple and complex at the same time. Simple in how it approaches its good versus evil story, but complex in the way it executes its good versus evil story.
Yes, and that is one criticism that I will levy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this story arc doesn't need to be as long as it is, and the only reason it is as long as it is because he keeps overly complicating it in weird ways that sometimes don't feel like they really go anywhere. Like the entire subplot where we spend like 2 or 3 episodes, but it feels like 5 fighting the big knight in the room.
Yes. Oh yeah, the two knights. I think it was like Tarkus and Bruford.
Right, and it's like, we were doing like a vampire story with martial arts thrown in, which is a great mixture, and now we're throwing in medieval knights and like all this crazy lore, and it just gets really meandering is a word I'll use. It feels like it meanders at times.
That is true, yeah. And another criticism I could lobby at Phantom Blood, at least this anime adaptation, is how, like you said, it kind of throws characters at you randomly all of a sudden. Like, we mentioned, it'd be one thing if Dio established that he had a bunch of minions, like high-ranking minions, and that Jonathan had to go against them one by one, sort of like kind of like that escalation of power, kind of like with Dragon Ball. You face off against Frieza's men before you graduate to the Ginyu Force, and then once you beat those guys, then you can face off against the final boss. And I think that's what Araki was doing here. But the thing is, he kind of just like pulls these new characters out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, once Zeppeli dies, you got Dyer and Straits and Tom Petty showing up.
Describing the plot of this is so interesting. It's like, all right, so here's the thing: Led Zeppelin, Dire Straits, Tom Petty, and
REO Speedwagon have to team up with this kid named JoJo, not the bitch with the bow in her hair, not her, and then they have to go fight a vampire, and it's like named Dio,
who is not the Holy Diver or the Rainbow in the Dark guy. He's a different guy. Looks a little bit like Joey Wheeler sometimes. That's not important. The point is, he's a vampire.
And he happens to have Jack the Ripper on his side.
He's got Jack the Ripper. He's got these 2 ancient knights. And it's just great. It's bizarre.
That's another big thing about JoJo, is that Araki loves to throw in musical references any chance he gets. The guy almost like prides himself on how much music he listens to, especially foreign music, because I guess back in the day, and even I would argue even still now, most Japanese people don't listen to foreign music unless it's like the super popular mainstream stuff. Like, I have several students who are in their 40s and 50s, even 30s, who were alive during the 80s. And they would ask me occasionally, what kind of music do you listen to? And I say, oh, I listen to a lot of 80s music, 80s pop, 80s rock. And they're like, well, whoa, what 80s music? I don't know what kind of 80s music existed back then. And so I would show them like a compilation of the top, 50 or 100 80s songs from, American 80s songs, or even, songs from the UK. And they only recognize like 5 tracks. And they're usually just like Queen, Madonna, and Michael Jackson. That's about it. So
what you gotta do is be like, you see, the '80s is when David Hasselhoff started, and they'll go, "Oh, David Hasselhoff! Isn't he big in Japan? I know he's big in Germany."
I have no fucking clue. So for Araki to make such references to the Dire Straits, to Tom Petty, to Led Zeppelin, I gotta say, I gotta commend this guy. This guy has good taste in music. This guy goes out of his way to listen to this shit. And this is the 80s, Dylan. This is pre-internet. So you really gotta go out of your way to listen to stuff that's not from your own country.
If anyone listening to this has wondered why the song Roundabout by Yes has become such a meme in recent years, I found out. Great song. More of an Owner of a Lonely Heart guy myself, but Roundabout's a good song.
If you like Owner of a Lonely Heart, you're gonna like one particular track from Part 2, my friend.
Oh, really? Did they use that? Anyway.
They don't really use Owner of a Lonely Heart, but they do have a track that literally starts off with down, 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 down. Like, someone's a fan, I see.
Right.
That is another tradition that the 2012 anime started, and that is to have English songs for not just English songs, but like foreign English songs for all of their closing credits. And Roundabout was the closing credit song for both Part 1 and Part 2. Part 3 was Walk Like an Egyptian. And,
nice. Very nice.
And I believe that was for the first half of Part 3, because Part 3 is so massive, it got 2 seasons as opposed to 9 episodes or 1 season for Part 2.
I see. So you got to watch Part 3, Part 1, and then Part 3, Part 2. I see. I understand.
Yes. I forgot what the name of the song for the ending credit song for Part 3. I think it was called Last Train, or like Last Train. I think it's called Last Train Home.
All right.
Yeah. And even still continues to this day of having English foreign songs, or by foreign I mean non-Japanese songs. I guess to like briefly talk about the other story arcs we had. So Part 1 takes place in late 1800s England, which is essentially Bram Stoker's Dracula. Part 2 takes place in 1930s World War II era America, as well as Europe and other countries, sort of like his take on Indiana Jones. Part 3 takes place in the 80s. Like, from the Part 3 onwards, everything's set in modern times during when the manga came out.
Wait. Part 3 is in the 80s?
Yes, Part 3 is in the 80s, and it is his...
But the guy from Part 2 is still alive in it?
Yes, he's definitely an old man by then.
Yeah, he should be way older than he looked in that image you showed me.
So it takes place in the 80s, and it's kind of essentially around the world in 80 days, where the characters start out in Japan and got to make their way to Egypt to kick Dio's ass.
Are there more recent parts in the fucking future? Because we're catching up to reality awful quick here.
Yes, actually. Part 6, which is going to get its anime adaptation this December, takes place in the future compared to when it was written.
I see. Future.
But don't worry. After Part 6, he reboots the continuity and goes back to the 1800s when he makes Part 7 into a spaghetti western.
Oh my god.
And then
does it take place in the American West?
Yes, it does.
I was gonna say, if it's a western, it has to. But the main character is still a Joestar. So it's a reboot, though. It's not in continuity.
Right. It's not
in continuity with the other ones at all. Wow.
Right.
Okay.
It's a reboot, but the main protagonist is a cowboy version of Jonathan, who is called Johnny Joestar.
Oh my god! And is there a cowboy Dio?
Yes.
Does he turn into a vampire cowboy?
I don't think so, because they still use stands.
Okay.
So yeah, Part 1 is Dracula. Part 2, Indiana Jones. Part 3, Around the World in 80 Days. Part 4 is a Japanese small-town slice-of-life murder mystery story. Part 5 is an Italian mafia story taking place entirely in Italy. Part 6 is an American prison break movie. Part 7 is a spaghetti western. And finally, Part 8 which is has been the longest running part so far, which has gone on for 10 years at this point, longer than any other part prior, which is actually going to end this month as of recording. It's the part 8 is like this. It's difficult to get a handle on this, what the story is about, having not read it. But all I can tell is that it's sort of a mixture of like supernatural, romance, mystery, drama hybrid deal. And I guess for a story that has gone on since 2011. I can see why it's juggled around so many different themes.
Interesting.
So yeah, that is JoJo in a nutshell. And so I know we've kind of been going back and forth between talking about part 1 and talking about like JoJo in general. But I guess that's what happens when you're talking about a story that is relatively simple and kind of comparing it to what would come next and how it and its later follow-ups has affected pop culture and internet culture at large. So, I guess, is there anything else? Is there anything else that you would like to focus on primarily, Dylan, before we move into final thoughts?
I'm probably going to kick myself later, but I don't think so.
Okay then.
At least nothing that immediately comes to mind.
All right then. So we've talked about how, about the action. We talked about how certain characters come and kind of show up out of nowhere. We've talked about the musical references, the animation. We've talked about voice acting. I guess we could talk about the ending, and I know, like, for a lot of folks who have probably not watched JoJo Part 1, maybe you don't want it to be spoiled, so I guess we won't go into detail there, but I will say that the way Araki approached this ending, it feels very suddenly, it's a very definitive ending to this particular chapter in the manga, and it was a type of ending that was considered rather controversial for its time, because like I mentioned before, once part 2 rolls around, you got yourself a new protagonist. You got a huge time skip. I believe it takes place 50 years later, and we're focusing on Joseph Joestar, with a whole brand new status quo. And yeah, people honestly did not do that back in the 80s. I remember hearing about how even when, I'm blanking out his name now, the mangaka, the creator of Dragon Ball,
Akira Toriyama.
Akira Toriyama, thank you very much. There's so many Akiras to remember. It was considered like...
It's a very common name.
Yeah. His publisher pushed against the idea of him aging up Goku into an adult when he got to the Z portion of the story. And so with Araki, he goes far beyond that by just completely replacing the main character just 8 months into his manga's run. And
yeah, it's crazy. It's great. It would be like, obviously Transformers is famous for killing Optimus Prime off in the movie and then replacing.
And even in America, people hated that.
Replacing him and the rest of the cast with an entirely new cast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine if they did that at like the end of season 1.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they did here. It's crazy. Imagine if every season of Transformers you had a new group of Transformers, and that's what this is kind of like.
Mm-hmm. And again, I keep repeating this, but I really, really respect the hell out of Araki for wanting to do that. I get the feeling that he probably thought to himself, I've done all I can with this character, I've done all I can with this setting, I'm kind of bored now, and rather than making a brand new manga, I'm just going to continue to call it JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but do Indiana Jones now.
And at that point, he was at least still trying to make the story of part 2 tie into part 1,
Yes, that is true.
Until you get to part 3 that he's like, fuck it. I'm tired of these vampires and this hormone.
Right. So with him, it like JoJo seems to be his like sort of his wide canvas for him to experiment with whatever he wants to put on paper. Mm-hmm. And so with what he ended up with was a story that I feel like was short, simple, to the point, did what it needed to do, And the way it ended, I thought, was very fitting for this type of story. And I guess without going into detail with what actually happens, for the sake, I know we tend to go into spoilers for the majority of our fully endorsed episodes, but I feel like a good portion of our audience, or at least my close friends, have not watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and so I wanted to keep this spoiler-free for them. But what were your thoughts on how Araki handled the ending?
Well, for one thing, it was a bit of a reference to a different part of the Dracula novel. It sort of borrows from something that happens early on in the Dracula novel, whereas the rest of it is sort of like the main plot of Dracula. That being certain events that take place while Dracula is in transit from Transylvania to London.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And if you know the novel, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you don't. So if you know, you know, as they say. So that was interesting. I liked it. I thought it was very dramatic. Well, I mean, everything in the show is very dramatic.
I would say very emotional.
Very emotional. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about it. I thought it was a pretty. I mean, I knew that I knew the general premise of JoJo and how each part has a different protagonist. So it didn't surprise me at all that Jonathan was not long for this world, so to speak. So you know, I didn't really have the shock factor that it would have had at one time. But as far as the way it was executed, I thought it was fine. A lot of reliance on those vampire laser beams, though. Of all the superpowers he gives the vampires in this, the laser beams are the only ones where I go, all right, really?
And trust me, man, it only gets weirder from there.
I imagine so.
Right. And I do like the idea of how Jonathan ends up making his bow by the end, because I feel like it helps kind of solidify him as sort of the most virtuous of JoJo protagonists. And people can say that makes for a boring character, but as a fan of characters like, say, Superman, I definitely enjoy the more pure-hearted, virtuous spirits, like very heroic spirit. He aims to be a gentleman in every sense of the word, and from that point on, he becomes like kind of the gold standard of heroism that all other JoJos must now have to look up to, or not look up to, but he sets the standards for all JoJos to follow, and we kind of see a little bit of that. I did show you 2 episodes of JoJo Part 2, just to give you an idea of just how things radically change from the setting of Part 1.
The protagonist of Part 2 is very different from Jonathan.
Yes. He's not a virtuous gentleman at all. Rather, he is a very mischievous rapscallion, per se.
Yes. Yeah, there's a good way and a bad way to write a character like Jonathan Joestar, you know? The bad way of writing them, they just come across as like overly naive idiots.
And I think he kind of starts out that way, but I think it does.
He can be that at times. He can be very naive, and he can make decisions that are somewhat idiotic. But I wouldn't characterize him as a naive idiot overall. You know. I think that overall he's handled really well. You know, a good example of how to write such a character is like, you know, the MCU Captain America.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
Or the second MCU Captain America. But you know, certain versions of Superman, depending on what continuity you're working in. You know, and I think that Jonathan is definitely on the right side of that equation, I would say.
Definitely. I'm very glad to hear that. And I would say also that by comparison, I really loved how it was through his meeting with Dio. Like you mentioned before, about he could be a bit naive, and I think that the intention was he starts out as a very naive, sheltered young boy, and it's through meeting Dio that he mans up and learns to fend for himself, to sort of like understand what it really means to be a true hero. Not say that, oh, I'm a hero, nor I want to be a gentleman. He decides, okay, time to get serious now. I gotta actually like work at this gentlemanly hero business.
It's basically what happened to you when you became friends with me. You were a naive, innocent little boy. And now you are a proper cynical adult.
Does that make you my personal Dio, Dylan?
I guess you could say that.
I'll be like running up the steps, ready to punch you in the face. Dylan!
And then I will monologue for 10 minutes about how I will destroy you.
It's useless, 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 useless! One thing I definitely I forgot to mention about Dio himself in terms of his motivation is that I love how he has this like this like major superiority complex. He feels like he's better than everyone else. He's smarter than everyone else. He deserves everything, and everyone else deserves nothing, especially Jonathan. I think there was a really good contrast between the two of them, where Jonathan was born into a life of luxury, Dio was not. Dio always had to fend for himself, and he feels like he worked hard enough to earn. He feel like he was screwed over. Someone of his intellect, someone of his genius was screwed over by life, and he's ready to screw life in return. And he hates Jonathan more than anything because he has everything that Dio ever wanted, and he feels like Jonathan does not deserve any of it. And that's why he chooses to he chooses to make Jonathan's life hell more so than any other because of how little he respects him. And over the course of the story, he does grow a mutual respect for Jonathan. And as the story progresses, you also learn that Jonathan, as much as he hates Dio and wishes to end his life, he does have some fondness for Dio, only because he pretty much grew up with him for a good majority of his life. So they both got some very complex feelings towards one another, both as brothers and as enemies.
Right.
And I feel like that is sort of like the emotional resonance there that kind of helps elevate JoJo's Bizarre Adventure from just being a show about muscular dudes beating the shit out of each other.
Yes, which it is.
Yes,
but it's also.
But there's more to that. There's more than that.
But it's also a character study.
It's about family.
It's about family. And that's what's so powerful about it.
I'm so sorry, Carrie Fisher.
It's it starts out as just the first couple episodes are like, oh, this is just like a character driven like drama. Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. And then they introduce the vampires and the magic martial arts, and I'm like, there it is. There's the Japan. There's the Japan I remember.
Right. So
I'm like, Andres, did you con me into watching a slice of life anime, you motherfucker?
It's like, oh, we'll get to that soon eventually, Dylan. I will say.
Oh my god!
I will say, part 4 is mostly a slice of life drama.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I was like, ooh.
But it's still I guarantee it's still JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, through and through.
It's a very bizarre slice of life.
Yes, indeed. So, with all of that said, did you like JoJo, Dylan?
I enjoyed JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, having only seen Part 1 in a vacuum, knowing nothing about, well, not nothing, but knowing very little about the other 7 parts.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen, I did enjoy. And I would even say that if any of this sounds up your alley, go check it out. It's a thumbs up.
Awesome. And having showed you the first 2 episodes of Part 2, do you think you'll continue this sometime in the future?
Maybe.
Okay, it is admittedly a long saga, But
it's a lot to get into. It's a lot to get
into.
It's a
lot,
sure.
yes.
It's also not as readily available for me as it is. You've got it on Japanese Netflix. I don't know. I don't even know where you watch it in America. Like, I'd have to do research, and who wants to do that? So,
yeah, well, there are certain.
Who wants to perform a Google search when I can just write it off and say, it's too hard.
It's spoken like a true American, Dylan. So, I'm glad that is looks like that's a fully endorsed for you for JoJo Part 1, Phantom Blood, and I will certainly fully endorse it myself. And for anyone else who enjoys classic shonen battle manga / anime, whether it's Fist of the North Star or Dragon Ball, or any of that stuff from like the 80s or even going into the 90s with Yu Yu Hakusho, and you want to see one of sort of like the forefathers, one of the manga that eventually sort of influenced so much of modern Japanese entertainment, I definitely, if you like the idea of what we're talking about characters with crazy posing and over-the-top bravado and musical references out the wazoo, definitely check it out.
Yes. Also, if you've never seen Yu Yu Hakusho, watch that one too. I feel like that one gets overlooked a lot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
But it's worth your time.
So, what are we going to cover next time, Dylan? I ask, despite knowing exactly what I'm going to get myself into next time.
Everybody listening to this probably also knows. Listen, I feel kind of bad. I don't want to turn fully endorsed into just a Marvel review show. But what am I going to do? There's a lot of shit coming out, and Andres can't see it in Japan, so I gotta keep my friend up to speed until he can return to America, the land of cheeseburgers. So
an apple pie.
An apple pie. So in the meantime, it's time to finally get this man caught up on arguably the best of the recent slate of Disney Plus Marvel streaming shows, Loki. Another little 6-episode jaunt into the merry world of Marvel. Are you excited, Andres?
Yes, I am disappointed that I was spoiled up by a few bits because of all the memes that have come out of it.
It was very memed.
Yes.
Just like WandaVision. Both of those shows were very... Falcon and the Winter Soldier to a lesser extent, but WandaVision and Loki, memes out the wazoo, so...
What are memes, if not humor everlasting?
Exactly, Andres, and I think that's a good place to wrap this up.
Indeed. So tune in next time for when we cover Disney Plus's Loki. And until next time, everybody, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
And I've been Super DM64.
And until next time, everybody, take care.